Clay, I have to apologize to our listeners. It seems that my error in making this podcast, surprisingly enough, is not that I'm a grotesque of inconceivable stupidity, but because I'm white and male and not repulsively obese.
I thought it was because you found more to admire in the male asshole.
That too. Then I give you a nice little slap on the ass and I walk on my way out of this podcast recording studio that we found ourselves into. Yeah, I've never connected. I'm not one to be like a sort of MAGA type supporter, but I did connect with being white and male and not repulsively obese. And I thought that the show really captured a moment there for me with E.B. Farnham and poor Richard Richardson, if we assume that that's his name.
You mean getting mad at a person of color because you were replaced by them, even though they're more qualified than you to do the job?
Yeah, and they keep me on in my job.
Yeah.
As a maitre d' or something like that. Yep, Aunt Lou, we're going to be talking all about all the changes, all the changes of the rainbow that are happening on Deadwood. And this one, the latest episode of our Deadwood show, which is covering the episode called True Colors. So we're going to take a break, we'll play the music, and we're going to come back and we'll break it down.
You're listening to a podcast that is a lie agreed upon. Join Wes and Clay as they discuss HBO's Deadwood and tell you something pretty.
True Colors is the third episode of the third season of Deadwood, directed by Greg Feinberg, written by Regina Corrado and Ted Mann. In this one, True Colors, a stagecoach arrives on the thoroughfare. Wu has returned wearing a fancy suit. On the same coach is Aunt Lou Marchbanks, who is happily met by her employer, George Hearst, and the theater impresario Jack Langrish, who greets his old friend Al Swearingen. Alma vows to meet with Hearst. Hearst asks Farnham for intelligence on the widow Garrett. Ellsworth, who has worked in Hearst's Comstock mine, disrupts Alma's meeting with Hearst. There's bodies in there, he says. The Cornishman Pascoe tells Bullock of a murder at Hearst's mine via another miner who translates. Swearingen escorts Langrish on a tour of Deadwood. Bullock tells Hearst he's put on notice. I identify a pattern in these events. Hearst scoffs, I put you on notice. Alma offers 49% of her claim for 5% of Hearst's. Your proposal offends entirely, he responds. Hearst confides in Aunt Lou that he'd rather be off by himself prospecting. So, Clay, this is True Colors, which, according to Vulture's ranking of the Deadwood episodes, is the third worst episode of the show.
Interesting.
So, I was looking at this list, and it's like, this is I know that you have to make a little listicle on the internet. It's just kind of like a required thing. But this is, I think there's a lot of shows, not just this one. They're incredibly difficult to rank, really. Like, it's almost meaningless, I think. And maybe I'm just kind of angry because I actually like this episode quite a bit, and I'm surprised that it's considered to be the third worst. But there's a little bit of like I think that their review is a little bit like post everything's done, sort of. That's like just about what they talk about, and it makes me think that they're kind of putting a retrospective view on the episode that isn't actually in it in and of itself. But how are you in the first place? You're doing well?
I'm yes, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. We've taken a little bit of time away from Deadwood. I was trying to segue into.
I'm glad we've had this time to catch up.
We haven't had any theater impresarios, I guess they call them, in the little summation, enter our lives or anything like that. But I was wondering if you had any in the weeks between the recording of these episodes, we had a little break, and I guess you didn't have anybody show up in your life that surprised you and knew you better than you even know yourself. No?
No, I can't say that I have.
What'd you think of Langrish in this? His Brian Cox's appearance.
Love Brian Cox. I'm here for anything he wants to do, and how big he wants to go. I'm with him all the way.
Why don't you see your type?
Excuse me?
Type. Don't you use type to print out your words?
Well, I'd hope to secure from Mr. Langrish.
I want copious discourse between us, Mr. Merrick. Where shall I find you soon?
Well, we could speak now if you wish.
Not now, young man. Not immediately. But soon. Very, very soon. Where is your lair, that I may beard you?
My lair joins the gym.
Wonderful.
I can be bearded there most hours.
Fine.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you, sir.
The camp is lucky to have you.
No way, actually, you can know that.
Go on then, Merrick, get away.
Incessant and unrelenting. Exactly that type of banter. Now, I'll just go out the front. I could go out that way, but I'll...
Did you watch Succession at all?
No, the last two big HBO Zeitgeist shows I just completely missed. Like, I haven't watched Chernobyl yet.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't watched Succession. I'll probably get around to it at some point, but it just was not something that I was following.
Chernobyl's short, so that one's an easy one to get to. I would say watch Chernobyl over Succession, but Succession is very good.
I hear they're both equally funny.
Yeah, yes, and sad at the same time too. They're both a comedy of errors, I think. But Chernobyl was excellent. Succession is also really good, and Brian Cox is obviously in Succession. But I'm watching that more in the background as Amy is dedicatedly watching it, and I'm sort of checking in every once in a while. And it's good. It's very funny and very sad. It does those things too two things very well.
I think we're coming up on needing a new show to watch, I think, because the stuff that we've been watching, we've almost run through every Columbo episode.
Right. And
the other stuff we watch is getting close to being done with the season, so maybe we'll look into that. I don't know. The thing that we keep doing frequently is I'll say, do you want to check this show out? And then Caitlin will say, yeah, okay, I'll give it a shot. And then after the first episode, she'll go, you don't have to wait for me to watch that. Which is just a death knell, because it's like the only time I would watch this is at night.
Yeah, yeah. And you have a little bit of, when someone says that, you kind of have a little bit of you're sort of being dared to finish it in a way, you waste your time watching that. Let me know how it goes, and I'm not going to join you. Yeah. But no, I choose what I want to what I want to watch. I decide when to drop in and when to enjoy a TV show and when not to. No one can force me to enjoy it. This is. I mean, we can start with the theater troupe introduction. It happens in this episode. One of the reviews I was reading was that they kind of set him up as an antagonist because he shows up in the spot that the series has always brought antagonists in, which is the third episode of each season.
Yes.
Because they brought in Tolliver in the first season, and then they brought in Walcott in the second season, the third episode. And he's brought in the same way. Did you ever have any sense that he would is an antagonist from his appearance?
A little bit, only because I don't know what his relationship to Al really is. And the thing that made me suspect of him actually was that first scene in the gem with Merrick, because Merrick kind of like shoots him a look where he's not totally sure what this guy's deal is.
Yep.
And that was the thing that made me kind of go like, all right, I don't know what this guy's deal is. And also he stiffed the Russian guy on a tip.
Yes.
But
he got his dollar. He overpaid for it, but he got his dollar from that lady.
But I mean, it's a little too early for me to really get a sense of what he's even doing there, honestly.
Sure. Is he gay or not?
I mean, back then, did you really need to put a label on it?
Freddie Mercury named his band Queen, and he couldn't convince anybody. Do you think that Jack Langrish is going to convince anybody?
I mean, I don't know. In a mining town, showing up in a cape and a wide-brimmed fancy hat, and then entering and leaving every room going like, hello, is a pretty good indication. But I don't know. I wouldn't say either way.
It's hard to say.
Be an actor.
It's hard to say. He might be. And the thing that I like about the theater troupe introduction is that they continue this idea of the town is going through development, right? So like we had our Wild West in the first season, then the politics have encroached in the second season, then in the third one, the thing that they introduce is the idea of like eventually a civilization or a camp or whatever is going to get to a point where like leisure becomes important.
Heath Ledger?
And the entertainment aspect, before you could stream Netflix or anything like that, you'd have to rely on a theater troupe to come into town. But it is the development that like the town is settled in enough to this point where you need some kind of entertainment, which is what I like about the theater troupe. The theater troupe continues in the third season, and we'll have more to say about them as they continue on. But I think that I don't know. I don't know. Do you would you what was your overall thoughts of this episode? I guess before I say how Langrishe ties into what I think about this one.
I thought it was pretty good. You know, I can see why it might be rated lower, because the tricky thing with this show is just that it seems like there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
But there's constantly stuff going on. I mean, I would say if you're dedicating a third of your episode to just walking around the town and showing someone the different buildings, maybe I can see why that might be a little bit lower on the list. But I mean, that was a fun. The interaction with those two was fun. I can't wait to see Tolliver, Brian Cox, and Ian McShane all in the same room, because there might not be any scenery left to chew, and it might the distortion level on the sound recording based just off the grizzle of all three of those men might be too much to bear.
I like the on the walk around is the important part of Langrishe, I think, in this episode is the sort of walk around, the town tour that he takes with Al.
Yeah.
My favorite moment of that is when Al's like introducing him to all the different places. He goes, "This is the sheriff's house, Bullock, insane fucking person."
Yes. Yeah. I did also like that they threw in a bit that I absolutely would do as well, where I'm like, in this house, you know, I don't know who lives there. I can't remember. Yeah, I think the tough thing is, though, right, because what I kind of felt was missing from this, and I understand that, like, in a realistic sense, it wouldn't make sense to do this, but like, if you're having a theater troupe come into town, I feel like the first thing you want to do is have them perform.
Yeah, sure.
Because like I got that they were a theater troupe, but I couldn't really get much past that as far as what their deal was.
Yep.
Because they're just all kind of hanging around. I mean, that's what you do when you come into town. You just kind of hang around for a while. You probably got to set up shop and find a theater or something.
Yeah, they're looking for a place.
Yeah, I'm assuming the Chez Amis is going to be the theater.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like in another kind of Tombstone analog, when the actors show up in Tombstone, it's like that night there's a play. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yep.
And so I think that stuff can get obfuscated a little bit. But I think this episode had some really great stuff in it. I think this might have been my favorite Hearst episode.
It's a great Hearst
so far.
episode. Yeah.
Yeah, because not only do you get the weird, kind of oddly infantile relationship he has with his auntie, or whatever he calls her,
Aunt Lou.
You get you start to see the mask slip with him in a few different ways, and it kind of all comes to a head in that really great Daniel Plainview speech he has towards the end of it that I thought was really good.
Talking to Tolliver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, I really did like seeing Auntie gambling with the Chinese guys and just talking about how much of a shithead Hearst was.
Yeah, chomping on a cigar.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
There was some stuff that was a little hard for me to track. Like I didn't totally get what was going on with the Cornish guys and the other guys in the jail until Bullock confronted Hearst about it, and like, okay, I get what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that they laid that out was very kind of, I found it a little hard to follow, because they're not giving you any exposition really. They're just showing you Bullock reacting to stuff that he knows that we don't totally understand.
Yep.
But I loved I thought the scene with Bullock and Hearst was great. I thought the scene with Alma and Hearst was great. Both scenes I thought were great. I really liked Alma's response to Ellsworth when they're walking through the thoroughfare, and she's just like, "Yeah, fine, whatever. You're my fucking husband, I guess." But, you know, like that sort of.
He forbids
that.
He forbids it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good overall.
Yeah, I think
the one thing about the show though is like I think it's. I don't know how many times we can talk about this, but I think it's a symptom of the way that the show's written, that it's starting to feel like, all right, what are we going to do this week? Let's have someone new come to camp. Yep. And I mean, that's kind of the thing with the setting, right? Is like there's lots of people coming and going, but it's hard for me not to kind of feel like it's just all right, let's see what happens this week kind of thing.
Yep.
And I don't necessarily think that's bad, but it is starting to stand out to me a bit more. Like if Brian Cox just like disappeared in 3 episodes, it wouldn't really surprise me.
He leaves a note for Al. Dear Al.
I'm watering these kids' vegetables. We don't do the other anymore.
Very good. Lovely building. Sturdy.
Get away now.
Interestingly, Milt wanted to introduce the theater troupe in season 1, interestingly, which they don't, and they leave them till season 3. I guess to close the Langrishe thing, like the Langrishe appearance of this episode to me is really just it recenters Al a little bit, and you get a sense of like Al as a real person outside of everything that we've seen in Deadwood. Basically, the idea is that he knows this guy from prior to living in Deadwood, so this guy knows more about Al than anybody else does, and he leads him around the town, and you get this nice little sort of understated thing about like there's an exposition and catching people up to the show and what's going on and how far the town has come from where it's been. Everyone's got a house, and it also is just it's an understated or even unstated ideal of like this is kind of what everyone is fighting for at this point, and that this is what Hearst means to dismantle from them. And so I think that works nicely. My problem with the Langrishe thing is maybe along the lines of what you're saying, in that it feels very strange. His introduction feels strange, sort of, in that like they clearly don't want to waste any time, but his introduction feels unlike any other character introduction on the show to this point. Like the way he just kind of gets out and starts yelling at Al, and it's a very unusual reaction, which I guess is intentional, but it's still, it does feel very much like the stagecoach is on like a conveyor belt, and this week this person is going to pop into the show, and there's no subtlety to it.
It's got a little bit of that sitcom-y thing where it's like this week Al's friend from college shows up, that kind of thing.
Yes,
I mean, that's a staple of shows like Miami Vice did that shit all the time, where it's like this week Sonny's former partner shows up, but he's undercover way too deep, that kind of stuff.
The Deadwood set, I mean, the idea of Deadwood doesn't hurt that introduction style, right? Like people should sort of be coming to this town like this, and it makes sense. It's just it feels super, I guess I would say it feels aggressively inserted. He just kind of arrives immediately. There's no real introduction. Everyone else, I feel, when Cy and Walcott came in, they started talking to other characters before they really just like power bombed their way into Al's life in that way. So I don't know. I don't know how strange it is, but that's always my issue with the Langrishe introduction, is that it seems to come out of nowhere and is very surprising, which the show acknowledges by, I think Trixie has the line like, "Who is this guy talking to you like this?" Like the characters are aware that it's also kind of strange.
Yeah, they do really just jump into it. Like as soon as he gets off the thing, he's like, "Al, fuck you."
Yes, you're right. I'm off to go find a house. Yeah, it's and we'll get more into it as like season 3 approaches. But and we had one of our listeners on the Discord, as well as Poindexter G, who's watching the show along with us, and he had some comments about Deadwood so far in the recent one. I haven't responded yet just because we were in the middle of recording everything. But I think that Poindexter maybe doesn't enjoy the show as much as I do, which is fine and fair. And I think that his comment just kind of reminded me of something that, like, there's this thing in the Deadwood Bible that I can read that kind of sums it up. It says, editor and screenwriter Steven Santos, who co-produced and edited the video appreciation Eli agreed upon David Milch's Deadwood, agreed with Cox. Agreed with Cox about something. He liked the 3rd season best because, quote, It drove home that Deadwood was meant to be a hangout show, as if the Gem Saloon was a 19th century Cheers with Al Swearingen presiding over the cast of characters who stepped through the doors. Deadwood was always about community, even more so in the final season when the town comes together to take its stand for independence against Hearst, the embodiment of America's capitalist impulses. As someone who pines for films and shows which value the micro and macro view of the world equally, such as in the tapestries of Altman's films, I live for the interactions on the margins. Al and Jewel shit-talking each other about the proper way to clean the floor. E.B. Farnham plotting his latest scheme destined to backfire. And yes, even Jack Langrish reciting Shakespeare. Season 3 is when Deadwood lets you admire each of the brushstrokes that makes for the bigger picture. I think this is undeniably important that this show be viewed this way, I guess. Like, more, not that it has to be, but like, I think to really understand why people love the show so much, it is this chaos thing that's happening. And I think that we'll get into the third season and talk about it, but Amy in this rewatch has been like, I don't think the third season is strong plot-wise as the prior two. And I would agree with that, but I still love the third season because I think the third season has some of the best, just these small little weird scenes that happen between people. And that kind of, that's my counter to what Poindexter was talking about on the Discord, is that like, it's less about plot in a lot of ways. Like Deadwood is not really a plot show. It is, as this guy was saying, it's kind of this hangout show where you're just tuning in to sort of hope that your favorite characters have a scene together for some reason. Yeah. And occasionally they do, and they're really good. There is a plot going on in the background, and I think that the show covers things like Hearst, I think, is a fantastic thread throughout the third season, but there are other things that I think feel more disjointed in the third season. Did you have any thoughts about that, I guess, that whole thing I went on?
Candidly, Richardson, as I imagine you foraging for berries and grubs and flicking at insects with your sticky tongue, I feel a certain dismay.
What are you talking about?
You're to be discharged, fool. As I suspect, in a wink of time, once some stage from a different direction arrives with my replacement, am I?
What did we do wrong?
Your error, surprisingly enough, is not to be a grotesque of inconceivable stupidity, but that you are white and male and not repulsively obese. As for my own, I wonder if it lies in an excessive courtesy, an eagerness to please.
Yeah, I think that kind of describes what we had talked about previously, in that, you know, we were kind of discussing whether or not this show would work today for a lot of people, and we were both kind of like, no, we didn't think it would.
Yep.
And I think the one of the reasons is because it is a hangout show, which is not something I had thought about before, but as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, absolutely, it's a hangout show. Because as I was saying previously, where it's like, I think a lot of people would watch this show now and think it had a lot of filler in it because they're looking for the plot versus just sort of hanging out with the characters,
right?
And just like absorbing the atmosphere and the interactions of the town. And if you're not ready for that, I think it can be off-putting. I recently watched Rio Bravo for the first time, the John Wayne movie. Yep. Rio Bravo, mainly because I had never seen a Howard Hawks Western, and John Carpenter loves Howard. A lot of those guys love Howard Hawks. John Carpenter, huge Howard Hawks fan. And I had always heard, Assault on Precinct 13 is like a remake of Rio Bravo. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You know, a bunch of guys inside a building trying to defend the building, etc. I'll check that out. And so I'm watching Rio Bravo, and Quentin Tarantino loves Rio Bravo. I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah. I'm watching Rio Bravo, and I'm like bored out of my fucking mind because it's like John Wayne hanging around town, Dean Martin hanging around town, Ricky Nelson hanging around town, and then like they start singing. Like Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson start singing with each other, and I'm like, what is going on? And then there's like a short gunfight at the end, and that's just the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do people love this? And then I listened to a clip of Tarantino talking about it, and he's like, Rio Bravo is one of the all-time great hangout movies. I'm like, oh. Yeah. Okay.
Very Tarantino, hang out and talk about something type thing.
Yeah, I was expecting like a John Carpenter movie, like a more tense,
right,
a siege thing or something,
right,
which is kind of an element of the movie, but not really the point. And so going into it with that expectation, I found myself just going like, what the fuck are these guys doing?
Right.
Why?
Right.
This is, I don't get it. But having that understanding, I'm like, okay, all right, I can see, yes, I can understand the attraction, what's interesting about it. And so I think knowing that is a big, will greatly affect the way that you view the show.
Yeah.
And if that's something that you like, that's great. But if it's something you don't like, well, then you're probably not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, you're going to bounce off the show, I think. Because I just, I've said it before again and again, but I find some of the scenes within the episodes of Deadwood, I just think are like perfect. Like between the characters, the actors, and the writing, it's almost irrelevant what else is going on in the town or like whether or not the machinations of the plot make sense. The Isringhausen type thing. The show is at its worst when it tries to do plot too much probably because of the way that it was produced, which is that they're doing things so off the cuff that long-term plotting is not something that's really possible. But the show is at its best when it's just this idea of like being made this way. It's David Milch getting there at 7:00 in the morning saying, "Who is here today?" And then they write a scene based on who's there.
Like the cast are just dock workers.
Yeah, just like he's pulling up to the Home Depot and some guys are getting into the back of the truck as they go off to fix his McMansion or something.
Yeah, I think the Isringhausen thing is a great thing to examine as far as this idea of the show goes, because I think it's a great example of when the show does and doesn't work, because the Isringhausen thing doesn't work because it is too plotty, and the reason that it becomes too plotty, I think anyway, is because the characters involved in that little side story aren't interesting, and they don't do anything interesting. Like, I'm not clamoring for another scene between Miss Isringhausen and Bosch, The
stakes are invisible in a lot of ways in that plot. Yeah.
But even so, like if that scene was Isringhausen and like Farnham or something, I would be a lot more interested in what was going on. Yeah. Or if she was, because I didn't find her interesting at all, as a character. Sarah Paulson's a great actress, but I don't think that character was doing her any favors. And so every time they cut back to her, I'm like, okay, she's working for who? Okay, great. Let's move on to people who are more fun to watch. And so I think that's the thing, is that that style of hangout show works when you've got characters who can carry that sort of scene.
Yeah.
And I mean, Deadwood is like 95% characters who can carry those types of scenes.
Yeah.
So like I think maybe it stands out that much more when it doesn't work, because everybody else in the show is just, sinking threes for the whole episode.
Yeah. One of the things I do like about the Deadwood Bible is that it's not exactly just a kind of circle jerk for Milch or whatever in the way that maybe I would, but they have Dayton Cowley follows up that quote from the Santos guy. He says, Dayton Cowley thought that that Milch was just wasting paint, which is a reference to the brushstrokes making for a bigger picture. He said, quote, "People keep talking to me about what a genius David Milch was. David is a smart man, no question, and a writer who can look at somebody and write them a perfect fucking character suited to their gifts is very fucking rare. But if you go into a season of a show not knowing what the story is, and you got to rewrite and reshoot things all the time to make it work, and you make people stand around waiting for your fucking inspiration, and a lot of the shit you don't do doesn't even make it into the show, well, how fucking brilliant are you? A brilliant person wouldn't have to shoot a lot of that shit in the first place." So I think that's the counter to it.
I think Dayton Cowley is really poking holes in the mystique of David Milch, because he clearly just talks like a guy from Deadwood and has a name like a guy from Deadwood.
He does, yeah. He's not far off from Charlie Utter, I don't think.
But yeah, I mean, I think he's got a point. Is it really that brilliant if you're just standing around all day waiting for? I think it's people can go either way on the production and on the show itself.
Yeah.
In that respect.
The other Cowley thing I'll read before we go into something else because it ties up our Langrish thing. Callie saw in the Langrish Swearingen scenes another example of David Milch losing the plot. Quote, people didn't like George Hearst coming in with all these fucking great scenes and shit, and a lot of the original characters got pushed aside. Yeah, it's typical fucking actor reaction. Who the fuck is this, and why has he got all the fucking good scenes? It upset a lot of people. Anybody who tells you different is a fucking liar. When David got tired of writing for the regulars, he would move on and bring in new characters. David would have made a great novelist. He writes really good scenes that don't belong in a television show.
Interesting.
And that's what I love about the show, actually. And I think Dane Callie is more of a television actor than that, but I think that some of the scenes are fantastic. And in this one, it's the George Hearst show, and Hearst is one of my favorite characters and definitely one of my favorite antagonists in this entire medium of television that we've ever had.
Sounds like Milch would have been a great wrestling promoter too, because I feel like that's how wrestling promoters work.
Just come up with great beats to move your story along.
you got your core guys who are your standbys and your the guys you can always count on, but then you're bringing in guys from the outside, and then your core guys start getting pushed down the card.
Oh, sure.
So Hulk Hogan can come in and start pushing everybody around. That's the big criticism of Tony Khan, the guy who runs AEW.
Yep.
Is they started with such a core of journeyman type indie guys who never really quite broke out, and as soon as they got the money, as soon as they kind of like got the ratings and got the backing, Tony Khan started bringing in bigger names from like WWE and whose contracts were up and stuff, who were all great additions, but a lot of the people who had been there from the beginning started to feel a little put out because they were getting kind of pushed down the card in favor of the new shiny character coming through the door.
Yeah. Well, and now the new shiny characters just have names like Bob Johnson and Tucker Timbaloo. all these wrestlers who look exactly the same to me have nothing else going on. Hearst, I suppose. So you said you like this one as a Hearst episode. Do you want to get into why? I think. Or why do you think that?
I had been critical of the way they were doing Hearst the first couple episodes. They kind of felt like he was treading water a little bit. And I think this broke out of that a bit because he, instead of just giving the same usual kind of like, I'm all about the color, whatever speech, you actually see how he reacts to people standing in his way, like actively trying to block him.
Yep.
And it's not pretty.
Yeah.
It's I thought it was really like there's a few things because there's even before it starts getting intense, I think one of the best lines of dialogue in the whole show, it's a really benign thing that Hearst says, but I thought it's just such a great summation of his character, is when Alma comes in and he apologizes for the mess. And he says, I give higher priority to making more space for myself than I do adorning the space I already made.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the whole thing right there, right?
Yeah.
I hope you'll forgive the disarray. I seem to feel a greater priority about making space for myself than adorning the space I've made. Refreshments?
No.
I must say, I feel less the grown man just now than a boy from Missouri. My Aunt Lou Marchbanks has come to camp.
Is your aunt's visit a surprise?
No. Heavens, no. Expecting my stay to be brief, I left her at other diggings.
Your Aunt Lou prospects, too.
My aunt's my nigger cook.
I see.
Wonderful, wonderful cook. And a tyrant, of course, as the best ones always are. I quite quake before her.
Do you?
About our conversation, too. Wanting so awfully much, we come to an agreement.
Don't disappoint him, being as he's 12 with his aunt in camp.
I've learned that we shared time in the Comstock. Mr. Ellsworth, I'm sorry we didn't meet.
Whatever's toward what he wants. Not a flying fuck if it's true or how fucking soaked in blood.
That talk serves no purpose.
What talk to a murderer does.
I'd not be insulted in my own rooms, Mr. Ellsworth.
Where shall we go for me to do it?
Will you be in this afternoon, Mr. Hearst?
bodies in here.
It certainly can be.
The walls are down to make room for them. I see every fucking one.
Great line.
Yeah, he's they do I don't know if you remember earlier on in the season or when Hearst was introduced last season, I had mentioned that I thought the show does a good job of tricking you into what Hearst actually is as a person. Where he comes off, his initial appearances have you sort of questioning whether or not he's as big and bad as the show is sort of presenting him as before he gets there. And he has a few scenes where there's the confusion about the way he's handling things that are standing in his way kind of comes across as if he has a moral compass within him, that he's being guided and that he wants to handle the Walcott thing and make things right by that. The way that he handles his other business makes you think that he's actually being driven by some sort of like kindness or consideration. And this episode does the same thing by introducing Aunt Lou to foil him a little bit. And Hearst, when Lou is introduced, becomes this sort of very pleasant, overly complimentary, sort of boyish thing. Ellsworth even calls him out that he's acting like a 12-year-old boy whose aunt has showed up.
Yes.
And he has this... It seems like the show is setting up that this Aunt Lou character is going to be someone who can kind of put Hearst in his place, and it's someone that he looks up to as kind of like a mother figure for him, and that he wants to please her, and he can't be all that bad because he's so complimentary of her, and she's an African-American woman, or she's black in Deadwood at this time. And so like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what a strange character, what a man of complications Hearst must be. But obviously, as they go through things and you start to understand, and the performance from the Aunt Lou actress is fantastic. And
yeah, she's really good.
When she's talking to him, and there's this little bit of she's not exactly sure what she should say in that moment when Hearst says something to her. And she's great. But then it ends with this kind of acknowledgement in the Tolliver scene that Hearst is basically one of these... Hearst is kind of, in my opinion, he's taking on this air of, he's sort of like this bourgeois progressive, right? Which is that he's kind of overly complimentary in a way that is bigoted in and of itself. It's like it's recognizing a difference through the way that he treats her by treating her, trying to elevate her in a way that only implies that he thinks that she's lower than him, right? And he says it at the end. He has his fantastic final line is that whole, what the hell is it? The, whenever temporary comfort relieving my displeasure brings me, my long-term interests suffer. My proper traffic is with the earth. In my dealing with people, I ought solely to have to do with niggers and the whites who obey me like dogs. And it all just flips at that moment. Like, not even at that moment. Like, Hearst has been leaning that way. But Hearst has no humanity at all in a way that you're kind of tricked into thinking that he does. And the only reason he acts this way and the only reason he's happy around Aunt Lou is that he believes her to know her place in a way that none of the others do in the town. And that makes him happy. Although he'd rather be alone by himself or with someone like Tolliver who's willing to sort of be the dog for him. But I think that Hearst is just, I think the performance is great. I think the way that he sort of slips into, he's not that different from Walcott. He just controls it and recognizes his long-term interests more. I like the metaphor that they bring back. Sexual violence is such a focus of the series. And what Hearst does is he considers himself basically raping Mother Earth when he digs for gold. He has that conversation with Lou about that, where he only wants to listen to be told where to dig into her. I just think I think Hearst is this like beautiful little abstraction of like some very dark things in humanity, and I think that the performance and the writing, like, it just makes him such an antagonist that I'm like fascinated to watch, and I think that he carries every scene that he's in with everybody.
With such disagreement among the statements, Mr. Bullock, on what basis could an inquiry justifiably go forward?
I put you on notice, Mr. Hearst. I identify a pattern in these events.
Unless some law is broken, Mr. Bullock, whose sanctions you have power to apply, Why in fuck should I care what pattern you identify or don't?
There is a sanction against murder.
The man lost his legs in a shaft. It happens quite often.
I now learn that your worker who died in the gym last week was killed by 2 of your guards.
I defy you to prove that event, about which the 2 of us have spoken, was murder. Whereas in the same saloon 9 days ago, 2 guards of mine, giving no provocation, had their throats cut, with 2 others of my guards as witness. Certainly the guards who survive are capable of naming the killers. Shall I have them make complaint?
Yeah, I really liked in that scene with I think it was Tolliver. Where he's like, I wanted to kill Bullock and I almost raped Alma. And like they cut over to Tolliver and the look in his face is like, holy shit. Yeah. like he definitely, like his tough guy facade breaks for a second where he's like, oh boy, this guy is something else.
Well, that's the other thing. The other thing I like about Hearst, and I can throw it to you, is that Gerald McRaney, in one of the Deadwood books I had, Milch had each of the actors write a little paragraph about what they thought about the character. And I thought that McRaney had this really great point about what he thought about Hearst, was that Hearst has a more narrow vision than a lot of the characters on the show, but he sees things within his vision more clearly than a lot of the other characters do. So Hearst, like my favorite is the first scene with Tolliver, which is that Hearst is not confused for a minute that Tolliver's Bible thumping is all bullshit. You know, he sees con artists for what they are, and he sees things, and he sees people's weaknesses in a way that a lot of the other people and the other characters have trouble getting to or like determining. And Alma's the example in this. Alma cannot see what Hearst is, but Hearst knows exactly what Alma is and what he needs to do to get things from her. And I think it just makes him for a very powerful antagonist. He similarly does the same with when Bullock tries to go in and like read him the riot act, and he's like, well, how about I just asked the guys who witnessed Al Swearingen kill my guys, and I go ask them to press charges, Mr. Bullock. What would you think about that? So,
seeing you on your balcony the other night, Mr. Tolliver, taking in the life of the camp, I thought maybe it's time we had a talk.
I regret we have to meet in this environment, sir.
Not at all.
No. Changes that have gone on here is not the place I'd be seen in by you.
I'm sure whatever changes you allude to, Mr. Tolliver, will come clear from your behavior.
Fresh start. How many men would be grateful for that opportunity?
Do you have more you wish to do with that, or shall I state my business?
Please, state your business.
Your letter from Mr. Walcott naming me as having knowledge of his misdeeds.
A letter I mentioned to you, yes, in a conversation I regret.
5% of my holdings I recall as your demand, or you would circulate the letter's contents.
Exactly what I regret and now find reprehensible, and why I thank God that you take a new look at me.
To this point, Mr. Tolliver, you make no materially different impression. Still lying, still bullshitting.
I hope I'm not, sir, but I can certainly understand why that would be your material second impression.
Shall I show you the letter from Mr. Walcott that I have in my possession?
That's not necessary from my point of view. You tell me you've got it, I believe you.
Here it is. Will you compare it to your letter? Verify its authenticity.
It's not necessary.
Shall I read to you certain pertinent sections on Walcott's assay of your nature and likely behavior after his death, his detailing your complicitous participation in the aftermath of his crimes, disposing of the bodies and so forth? You have no letter from Walcott, Mr. Tolliver.
Let's say that's the case.
I just did. Let's hear you say it.
I have no letter from Mr. Walcott.
Never did.
I never did have one.
You're a lying, blackmailing sack of shit.
What do you want?
I want you to go to work for me.
But yeah, any other thoughts about Mr. Hearst in here, or favorite sequences?
Yeah, I think he's very fascinating because he puts on airs in both directions, right? Like he's the way he talks to Lou, but also the fact that he's basically like a Duck Dynasty cast member, where he's like, yeah, I'm just like you guys. I'm a man of the land. But then he's a super rich guy who, you know, is definitely. Does she call him on that? Does Lou call him on that in some sense, or somebody call him on that in this episode?
Well, she talks about
maybe it's Alma. I can't remember. Somebody mentions him sort of his shit kicker attitude being kind of an act or something. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Maybe I was just thinking that.
She brings up because Lou brings up the fact when she wants to clean his boots that he doesn't have another pair. Because I think that, I mentioned it before, but Hearst is interesting because Hearst is not interested in what the wealth brings him besides getting the gold. And I think that's a really fascinating character description for someone, that he is this abstraction of an idea about capitalism. And what I think he does a good job, because I always run into this issue with this, like, you have this sort of like anti-capitalist type thing, and obviously capitalism has problems, but I think sometimes people throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is to say that, like, capitalism can only become Hearst, which I don't think is correct, really. Mm-hmm. Like, the capitalism is just the engine that creates the wealth. But the problem with the engine is that the driver there could potentially be someone like Hearst, who has this sole, narrow, myopic vision of he just wants more and he wants everything else. And, like, he ceases to see boundaries. He knocks down the wall of the hotel. He's potentially going to violate women and things like that. He does not respect difference or distance between things because he thinks that the world is his. And I think that they do a good job of just making Hearst that thing, which is that he's not even interested in the greed or the ostentatiousness of it. He's interested in the power dynamic that comes from it, and that's the most dangerous thing with it, as opposed to his, because you could praise Hearst for being so driven that he's so successful, because he's clearly driven in what he wants to do. It's just that his focus is wrong, and he's willing to do harm in the direction of his focus, which could, otherwise be harnessed for good things.
Yeah, you should get a giant, a full T-shirt print of his face, like one of those Scarface T-shirts.
Yep.
Because, that's the same kind of thing, right? It's
instead of like a Che T-shirt or something, is that the reference?
No, like the Tony Montana Scarface T-shirts, with the whole culture built around him as being this person who played the system and won capitalism.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah,
whatever the interpretation of that movie is, other than drug dealer goes down hard,
Yeah, sure. If he's the end stage of capitalism or something like that. On that subreddit. Yeah. No, Hearst is just. But I think that's what makes him, it's what we talked about before. It's what makes Hearst somewhat unrealistic, too, because he's more powerful than you would think he could be. But he is just a man in this show at the same time. So it does take a little bit of a theatery symbolism to sort of understand him, I guess.
I'm still dying to know if there's any inspiration drawn from Hearst for Daniel Plainview, because I feel like they're very similar characters.
Mm-hmm. They Will Be Blood the movie was after this, though, right? It must have been.
Yes. Yeah. Because they both have that same drive, single-minded drive, which I think very smartly in both cases doesn't, where that could, in the hands of lesser writers, result in a single, a one-dimensional character. They realize that the thing that gives him dimensions isn't the single-mindedness. It's how he reacts to everyone else around him in service of the single-mindedness.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's what you're starting to see here with Hearst, is you're seeing how the different groups of people that he's interacting with, and how he reacts to them, and how he sometimes feels the need to placate them, and put a big smile on, and then what happens when they
deviate from what he wants.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, he's a good performance. It's just from one of the reviews, I thought this was a good line about him. It's, quote, "Hearst's inhumanity has a clarifying effect on the series, which is so charming, even at its nastiest, that it was always at the risk of letting us get too comfortable with the characters. A monologue in the meeting between Hearst and Cy hangs a frame around Deadwood's portrait of class, gender, national, and racial hierarchies. Hearst is not ashamed exactly that he wants to own the world and everyone in it, but he does know that others expect him to be ashamed, and he recognizes that his impulse to rape communities and institutions, and perhaps on occasion women, impedes his ability to do what he loves the most, which is to rape the planet. Which is his difference from Walcott, right? Like people say that they are similar in some sense, but Walcott is kind of a proto-Hearst, which is that he hasn't developed this idea that he needs to delay his urges. You know, he can't. Hearst has the quote in this line, like they were saying in that review, is that the things that he wants to do, he recognizes because of experiences in his past harm his long-term interests in what he actually wants to accomplish. And Walcott didn't have that realization, mostly because I don't think that Walcott had any long-term goals or drives in the way that Hearst does. Like Walcott was driven by his insecurities and his sort of like fucked up nature in a way that Hearst is able to suppress it in some way because he has a bigger goal in mind at the end of the day. Yeah.
Walcott definitely didn't have anything that he was driving towards.
No, which ultimately makes his suicide make sense, right? There's just once it's gone, he's gone as well. Poindexter also mentioned not recognizing that the Walcott committed suicide, and I was like, oh yeah, he does. But I went back and I rewatched it. It's not exactly clear that he's killed himself.
No, I when I watched it, I remember when we recorded, you mentioned that, and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that was Walcott.
Yeah. So it's definitely not clear. Although
very fast.
This episode clarifies something I had asked at the time in that episode, which is the finale of season 2. I said, who is Walcott writing that letter to? Because there's a scene where he's just writing and they don't say anything. Yeah. He's writing it to Hearst, which is what Hearst brings up with Tolliver in this one, because Walcott's suicide letter described what what Tolliver was going to do after the fact, and that he hadn't given him a letter, which Hearst uses against Cy in this one. What do you...
You didn't have no fucking letter from Walcott.
What do you think? What do you think of Cy Tolliver as he exists at this point in the series?
I think Cy has taken such an interesting turn, because every scene with him still has that Powers Booth stank on it, but he's just such a bitch now.
Yeah.
And like it's he's literally referred to as like a lapdog, and he's like, yeah, baby, that's why they gave me a tail. That's why I gotta give me a tail. You know? It's like, Cy, am I supposed to take you seriously here? Like, don't, on the one hand, you've got Joni, who is, I think this is just natural in how people like this are in real life, but you've got Joni, who's like terrified of this guy and who has such an intense stranglehold on her. And then on the other side, he's just, bending over for Hearst.
Yeah.
And happy to be his bitch.
Dog. Yeah.
And it's very interesting, because I don't know what he has never seemed like someone. Okay, what am I trying to say? People who complain about drama, not liking drama and demanding respect and dignity, are usually the ones who are constantly surrounded by drama and have little or no dignity and deserve no respect.
Yeah.
And he's definitely one of those people who has a very high-minded view of himself in a very certain way, which is compensating for the fact that he is a total pushover when someone stronger than him enters the scene.
Yeah, he's interesting because he foils against Hearst nicely, I think, which is that Tolliver is surprisingly driven by what other people think and how other people react to him, and Hearst does not think it's relevant at all how people react to him, because he's going to get what he wants. But Cy is so needy in a way that is very obvious through the 2.5 seasons that we've seen of him, and with Joni leaving and him getting stabbed and everything like that. When he doesn't have everyone just in his clutches, he's really a very pathetic character who doesn't really have much else going on for himself, and is willing to sell himself to Hearst for any kind of bid at all, because he doesn't think that he has anything else going on. His cons are not as good anymore. He's just run out of gas, really. It's like there's nothing left of him.
That's the thing too. I feel like every one of these scenes, even when he's getting steamrolled, the way that Powers Booth plays him is like the inner monologue of Cy Tolliver is, man, I'm really getting one over on Hearst here.
I love the first scene between those two, where he's trying to do the Bible thing, where he's like the good Lord, Mr. Hearst, has given me guidance. He's like, fuck yourself, Cy Tolliver. You're a shitty blackmailing con man. He's like, I like the turn of, he's like, what do you want from me? Like, why did you come here? And wants him to work for him. So Cy is continuing down that path of not having anything. I don't
like he's no better than Farnham at this point.
No, he's not. He's just more confident, I guess. Farnham recognizes his position, I think, a little bit more than Tolliver does.
And I think they're the same kind of person, though, right? Because Farnham takes the power that gets exerted on him causes him to exert power on Richardson. The same way Tolliver exerts power on the women.
Yes.
To balance out the power that's exerted on him by Hearst and society,
the power flows down. Like they always, they're the characters who get pick on people who are below them, as a way to like stabilize their minds or whatever.
It's so strange, isn't it? I mean, I guess it makes sense. Yeah, because I mean, it just exists everywhere. Like I remember when I was little, I spent a lot of time at my cousin's house.
Yep.
And I had 3 older cousins, and the youngest of those cousins would always like tease me relentlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime I would complain about it to my mother, she'd be like, well, he's doing that because he has an older brother who does it to him. And I was like, okay, I mean, in a weird way that makes sense, but like, why would you do, I couldn't comprehend what that power dynamic was.
Yeah.
But it is, that's just how the world works. People get fucked over by someone and they sit on it and stew on it, and when they get the chance to fuck someone over who's lower than them, they're going to do it.
Yeah. It's the same with it's the same but less serious, but it's the same way that like sexual abuse would work, which is that it's like the teasing or whatever alters, and the sexual abuse like alters your understanding of reality to a point where it's like all is that, and so passing it on has that kind of twisted logic to it, which is that like this is the way that the world seems to make sense to me at this point. Unfortunately, teasing is just a lesser variance of that. And it's the whole like, because with the little kids that I have, it's like it's just kind of like a performative like power play. It's like they try to get on top by teasing other people, which is obnoxious and always needs to be. You have to hit them on the snout, as Hearst says here, and you do it with a trained hand.
You should do a social experiment and have your youngest son take boxing lessons.
Yeah,
but not the other ones.
Yeah,
and so
I tie them down like veal, and they just can't have any muscle. Yeah,
see how the power dynamic in the family changes once the oldest brother tries to push around the younger one, and he gets a hook to the jaw.
Well, the 6-year-old takes jiu-jitsu now, and he's been doing it for a couple of years. And I was like, this is good. He'll defend himself. But he can now come up behind me and put me in a choke that actually causes me to choke. And I'm like, all right, well, we've trained.
Does he have to jump like 1.5 feet in the air, or is he like 6 feet tall?
If I'm like sitting on the couch or something and he like hops up behind me, and he can do enough. Not that I can't shake him off, but it's enough where I definitely lose my breath for half a second until I manage to pull his arm off. But
is he a black belt yet? Because I felt like there must have been a huge dip in martial arts. What's the word I'm looking for? Not subscriptions, but
just numbers of people participating in it.
Yeah, the number of people who are taking martial arts lessons. I feel like there must have been a big dip somewhere when I was in my teens, because I had younger cousins who started taking karate.
Yeah,
and when I took karate, there was a kid's belt system and then an adult belt system.
Yep.
And it was like, you could the highest you could get as a kid was a red belt, and then pretty much nobody got there, because by the time the length of time it would take to achieve a red belt, you were old enough that you would go into the adult thing, right?
Right, sure.
So there were no young black belts or anything. Then my cousins are taking karate, and like at 12. they're like, oh yeah, he just got his black belt. I'm like, what?
Well,
in what?
Yeah, the belt system is a little weird because he hasn't belted up. He did judo before that, and the belt system is fairly arbitrary, really. At least at the place that he was doing, and not in a. Maybe it starts getting serious once you get to like black belts and they start having like the tiers of black belts that you have at that point. Maybe that means something,
yeah.
but it was really like this kid showed up to class 4 weeks in a row. He gets a belt at this point.
That's what I mean. Yeah, I feel like they must have really lowered the lowered the bar for entry for passing.
So if you're walking down the street at night and some guy with a black belt steps in your path, you have a chance that you might be able to take him down depending on when he started training.
Yeah, if like a 13-year-old with a black belt jumps in front of me, I think I might be able to front kick him through a window or something. But
Yep. Don't get choked up.
We had like stripes and stuff on the belt, so it was like every belt had like a multi-tier.
Yes, it doesn't go color to color, and sometimes they split the colors, so you'd be like a purple and yellow or whatever.
Yeah, it was. You had to earn that shit.
Yeah,
back in my day when I took karate when I was 8.
It's not as. I think things have. Well, the difference is that when we started, there was no MMA yet, so
True.
MMA kind of exposed which of the martial arts are ones that people should actually train in, which would have like real world applications, I guess. And jiu-jitsu has stayed that way.
Have I talked about the rabbit hole I went down once where I came across these videos on YouTube of this guy who was probably, I don't know, maybe his mid-20s, maybe late 20s, and he was an Aikido master. And
Sure.
he had trained he had spent his whole life training in Aikido. And he had heard people shit-talking Aikido, saying it wasn't a practical martial art and there was no actually like practical application or whatever, and blah, blah. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to spar with a mixed martial arts fighter and see how my expert level ability at Aikido fares up against an MMA fighter.
Yep.
And he got wrecked to the point where after he got wrecked, his follow-up video was him saying that he's decided to stop learning Aikido and that he felt like he wasted his life. And that he was now going to start training in mixed martial arts. And it was a very interesting rabbit hole to go down because the end of that story was him getting divorced from his wife and then like traveling the world on foot like Kang from
karate,
Kung Fu.
Kung Fu, yeah.
And like to the point, and he had like a special suit made for him he went fucking nuts. Like it was very interesting how getting punched in the nose once by an MMA guy shattered his entire view of the world.
Yeah, I mean, Rogan on his podcast kind of always talks about that because some of the martial arts have a very like religiously spiritual outlook to them where, it's like the master of the dojo or whatever has these like kids who are just sort of like, it's the same, it's those like those, whatever, Baptist or whatever kind of churches there where the touched, they do the speaking the tongues and stuff. Like a lot of it just becomes this sort of performative social thing to do.
Yeah.
And because it might have been the same idea, but there was one of those guys who just like, it's a martial art where like he holds up his fist and people fall down, but he went up against someone who was actually like an MMA fighter and he just like broke his face in half a second and it's over.
The reason I found this whole thread was because I had I think it started with me looking up a Steven Seagal video. And Steven Seagal is notorious for doing those kinds of bullshit exhibitions. And I went from there into, this longer form essay someone had done about how all martial arts are kind of like more cults than they are anything else. And that got into this story about this this mixed martial artist guy from China who basically pushed back against the idea that Kung Fu was this inconquerable fighting style.
Yeah.
And Kung Fu is like built into the society of China in a way that that stuff is not here.
Yep.
And he did an exhibition against a Kung Fu master, kicked the shit out of the guy.
Yep.
And basically got thrown in jail as a political prisoner because of it.
Yeah.
And
it's upsetting.
And the way he ended up getting out was he had to have another match with another kung fu master wearing clown makeup on his face, and basically he had to let the kung fu guy win.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's just like, man, very, very intense.
That's why MMA was basically a science experiment to determine which of the fighting styles are legitimate. You know, that's really all it was.
Yeah.
Is that like early MMA was like all kinds of like weird fighting styles and just street boxers, and like, you know, early MMA was just like giant fat guys that were throwing haymakers.
Yeah, and, those early ones are fun to watch.
But eventually you learn, you know, they settled on you need to have boxing as a stand-up game, and you need to be able to do some kind of jiu-jitsu hold-based thing on the ground when all fights go to the ground, and that's the best kind of fighting style that you can have.
I remember seeing another video that was speculating that the first UFC was heavily skewed to favor. It's a family. I can't. They're the most Gracies, yes, who basically are the
preeminent jiu-jitsu
preeminent jiu-jitsu in like all the world, I think. And it was like borderline conspiracy theory about how the first UFC specifically ended up putting them in a position to win based on the people that they ended up fighting at certain sections and stuff. It was interesting. But,
yeah, I mean,
I hadn't seen
it was all just random. They used to have like single day one and done knockout tournaments in UFC, which is insane that you would have to fight multiple times in a day. But I mean, the Gracies might have just, if you know, the trained jiu-jitsu guy is going to beat the fat guy who's throwing haymakers, I think. Like, that's just the way it works. So.
Hey, man, all it takes is one punch.
It does. You just have to make sure that the punch lands. Well, we are at an hour. We'll wrap this up with...
Sorry, I didn't mean to take up all that time talking about...
No, that's fine. Any
karate videos.
Any random thoughts? I'm looking at my screen now, and just one of the quotes I had was the Ellsworth, Alma, and Hearst scene. Ellsworth says, "What talk to a murderer?" Alma says, "What that talk serves no purpose." Ellsworth says, "What talk to a murderer does." Hearst says, "I'd not be insulted in my own rooms, Mr. Ellsworth." And Ellsworth says, "Where shall we go for me to do it?"
Yes, yeah, that was really good. You know, I thought the scene where after Alma goes back and she ends up talking to Ellsworth, I thought that was really interesting.
Talking to Ellsworth, not to Hearst. After she has gone to talk to Hearst and she goes back and she's talking to Ellsworth, the way that she kind of breaks down a little bit, and he says she would have deserved it, which is marriage is tough recovering from that. I think.
Yeah.
The thought I'd put into it, all the time I took to write it out and put it by and look again. I began to read to him my proposal. But I was more and more afraid I was only chanting sounds. Finally, I made myself look to him to confirm that I was speaking intelligently and being understood.
Now you know.
He grinned at me like a jackal.
This is what I would have spared you.
He scorned my offer. He said I mistook his nature. Absolutely.
You did?
Yes.
And was there more? After the jackal smile?
It seemed very possible that there could be, but finally he let me go.
He had restrained you?
I was very afraid. I can't say with any certainty exactly what was happening.
What the hell do you mean? Did he try to leave? And did he prevent you?
Don't use that tone of voice with me.
Well, I guess I know what that means.
Oh, do you, Mr. Ellsworth?
That you're a goddamn fool almost got what she deserved.
And what would that have been? And why would I have deserved it?
I only wanted to protect you.
You can't.
That's a rough way to respond to your wife almost possibly getting raped by a person you know is a murderer.
Although I think the show I think the show sets up that conflict almost perfectly because they're both right. Like Alma was wrong to do what she did, and Ellsworth was trying to, Ellsworth was trying in his sort of like impotent sham marriage kind of way to like have some say in what goes on and knowing better. And she being Alma refused to do that and said that I'm in control of this situation. But then he obviously takes a lot of glee in the way that like a lot of real relationship fights go, which is that he chooses the wrong moment to say the wrong thing there at the very end, and it all blows up in his face. But I just like how I like that fight because of how balanced it is, and it's not they're both wrong and they're both right at the same time, which I think is a good fight. Yeah,
because it's clear. I think it's clear that she doesn't really, especially now that the baby's gone, she doesn't really have much respect for Ellsworth, I don't think.
Right, yeah.
And so the way that she completely disregards everything that he warns her about with Hearst, as him just being, overzealous or whatever, overreacting, only to have arguably more happen than maybe he warned her about.
He thought,
it's a good turn of events. I think, man, I continue to think she's a really good character, and because she's not a great person. And she's, in this case, I think they are both right and they are both wrong, but it continues that thing where even though she is in this marriage, it's clear that she doesn't think that he's on her level, Even when she's talking to Hearst and she's like, this is just my first proposal. I don't know what I'm doing here.
Hearst's responses in that one are fantastic. He has some great lines. He says, "I'm afraid I lack the qualities that minority participation requires," which is understatement of the year. He has the thing about like it offends just his like disgust with her proposal about the whole thing. It's a I don't know, and I think McRaney, when she's talking, his facial acting is as he's just getting more and more like incredulous that this is what she's come to him with. I think it works out pretty well. What was the? I had one other. I don't remember what it was actually. Cochran, he's sick.
Oh yeah.
That's maybe the only other thing that super happens in this episode. But there isn't even much there. It's just that Cochran has come down with a cough.
I did like that scene though, where Trixie was like, if you want me to put out the cigarette, you can just ask, and then he just vomits up blood.
I'll go now. Yeah. So tuberculosis, you would assume, which is not good news in 1877 or whenever this takes place. All right. Any final thoughts about this one? True Colors. You liked Brian Cox being added to it, but you're interested in seeing more where that goes. You thought it was a good Hearst episode. Is it the third worst episode? We haven't seen the worst episode yet. We've seen the second worst, according to Vulture, which was Bullock Returns to the Camp in season 1.
Okay.
And True Colors is next. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you said it's kind of a fool's errand to try and compare these episodes because it's I think some of them obviously stand out as great, but I don't know. I have yet to see one where I was like, it was a stinker.
Yeah, agreed. It's just the little, everything exists in the little moments of the show, and I continue to always enjoy the little moments. My final thoughts. I like this one. We'll talk more about Langrishe and the theater troupe as they move along. I thoroughly enjoy Hearst as an antagonist, and I enjoy every scene that he's in. I think that the show is really doing something interesting with his character. All the scenes tick and move along. I love little random bullshitty things that happen, like when Merrick and Blasnoff, he's trying to explain how they can send two messages at the same time by talking in a high voice and a low voice. It's just weird. The show just has weird little... They came up with this on a whim and shot a scene about it, and it made it into the final episode. It's really charming, enjoyable.
I'm always a sucker for a good wordplay joke, and there's I forget who Trixie's talking to, but someone says her temperament is labial or something.
Yes,
and
labile.
She responds
labile,
with labile.
Yeah.
She's like she was talking through her cunt.
Trixie always makes weird connect because she was the one who got the Jew harp. What's the Jew harping on about? And she's like, "Is that a fucking pun?" Yeah. So Trixie's always.
I don't know.
Jokes.
She's nuts, man. I don't know
Trixie.
what's going on with her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like every single scene with her is her storming in and just screaming about something, and whoever's there is like, I don't know what you're talking about. Could you hand me the mail?
I didn't remember how many scenes of Saul Star are just him being incredulous to being yelled at by Trixie. He really doesn't have much else going on but be yelled at her.
This season especially, I mean, we're only a few in, but definitely a lot of last season is mostly him just kind of standing there bewildered and going like,
all right.
Okay.
Yeah, she comes in hot. Was there a pun? Oh, your pun made me wonder if I can't remember what it was at this point. I thought there was a pun, but maybe there is not at this point. Yeah, the labile. She's talking through her fucking cunt. That's it.
It reminded me of a line from the Miami Vice movie that I always thought was so stupid, where they're telling Crockett and Tubbs, this informant guy or whatever is talking about the bad guy Jose Hierro, and he says, "You don't understand. These guys are vertically integrated." And then Tubbs just goes, "You mean they walk around with constant erections?" He goes, "No. I mean, there's something." Somebody goes, "I know what it means." It's just such a weird thing to throw in.
Yep. They'll throw these jokes in. They'll throw them out. I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody, for listening to our coverage of True Colors, the third episode of the third season of Deadwood. Only a little bit of episodes left. The season is the final one that we're in of Deadwood. You can support the show at patreon.com/thepenskyfile. If you're coming to the podcast late and we're already done, you can still go to patreon.com/thepenskyfile, figure out what we're up to now, give a couple dollars to support the work that we did in the past, create something of value, and then monetize it for later on down the line. And that's it. There's a Discord, all that stuff. You can find all the links down in the podcast description below. We will be back with the next episode, which is called, what the hell is it called? Full Faith and Credit. So, Clay, did you have anything you want to say before we head out of here?
Keep checking out Rotten Horror Picture Show. We're doing Video Nasties this year on Patreon. We've got Toby Hooper's The Funhouse coming up for August, and I don't know what we're doing after that. We only got a few more left there, and we've got we just finished season 2 of Batman Beyond on Badass. We're going to be taking a bit of a break and then coming back to do the movie Return of the Joker, which I'm very excited about. And I was saying to Sean, I was debating whether we should save Return of the Joker till we finish the series, only because I feel like Return of the Joker is by far the high mark of Batman Beyond, and if we do that now, we might not be super enthused about coming back to finish out the rest of the season. But we're going to do it chronologically, and so that's where Return of the Joker would land, is in between seasons 2 and 3. So also check out the comic book I've got on the stands. Batman White Knight presents Generation Joker. Got 2 issues left. Issue 5 comes out in September and features a variant cover drawn by yours truly. So, be much obliged.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the show. This is the Something Pretty podcast. I'll end it with, I think sometimes maybe Jack Langrisha's quotes aren't as memorable, but I'll say a couple of them here. He says, "Always superfluous bloodshed, deeper damage is best." And my favorite Jack Langrish quote is, "It's the learning fucking nothing owl that keeps me young," which I think is a very good little quote. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This is Something Pretty. We'll be back next week with Full Faith and Credit. See you then.
I hope you'll take it as measure of my keenness, sir, and curiosity.
Yes, Mr. Tolliver. You wish to know your duties in my service.
I'll make my way through the muck to learn the details.
Your duties will be to answer like a dog when I call.
Like a dog?
Complications of intention on your part in dealings with me, or duplicity, or indirection, behavior, in short, which displeases me, will bring you a smack on the snout.
Ouch.
When administered by a practiced hand, such a blow can be more painful and grievous even than your recent sufferings.
I don't doubt the hand would be practiced.
Mr. Swearingen recently discovered as much.
I gather it Cost him a finger.
But I should say, too, that in these rooms just this afternoon, such displeasure brought me near to murdering the sheriff and raping Mrs. Ellsworth. I have learned through time, Mr. Tolliver, and has repeatedly seemed to forget, that whatever temporary comfort relieving my displeasure brings me, my long-term interests suffer. My proper traffic is with the earth. In my dealings with people, I ought solely have to do with niggers and whites who obey me like dogs.